On today's show, let's take a look at some of the lineups that were most successful for the Cavs last year and talk about how Kenny Atkinson can use the same group of players in different ways this year on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
For making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find this show wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. Be sure to drop us a 5-star review. Leave some nice words in the comments as well. That's how you can help to grow the show. We're getting so much closer to basketball. Can't wait to be able to talk about real basketball with you. Also, check us out on YouTube. Just search Locked On Cavs on YouTube. If you're watching me right now, click that thumbs up button. Hit that subscribe button. Ring that notification bell. Make sure you're getting the latest Locked On Cavs content as soon as it's put up each and every day. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. This summer, FanDuel is making you get more out of your summer. So make every moment more with them. They're hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hi again, everybody. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. And today, I want to talk about some of the most used lineups that the Cavs have had in past years because I think with a roster that is, for the most part, the same. I know they've added Jalen Tyson. I know that things might look a little bit different with Kenny Atkinson as the head coach of the team. But with a roster that hasn't changed much, I think we're going to see a lot of the same lineups that the Cavs used last year this upcoming season. So the place that I want to start, and I think the place that makes the most sense to start this discussion, is of course with the starting lineup. And what did you hear last year about the lineup? Is that, they didn't get a ton of time together because there were so many injuries that the Cavs' ideal starting five, which of course was Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Max Strus, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen, only played 28 games together. And that's right. That group, which only played 28 games together, played 368 minutes together on the court. By starting lineup standards, that's not a ton. However, that was the most used lineup by the Cavs last year. So I do think that lends a little bit of, okay, this team was really beat up because their most used lineup was only 368 minutes, where there are some teams that had less, like the Dallas Mavericks, for instance. Their most used lineup was actually a smaller sample size than the Cavs, but you take a look at them, what did they do? They made a big trade in the middle of the season. They revamped their team. And then you take a look at the NBA champion Boston Celtics, where their starting lineup played over 600 minutes together. So there are both ends of the spectrum, certainly. But a little bit about the starting lineup for the Cavs. So that group, 368 minutes together in 28 games, as I said. They had an offensive rating of 112.7 and a defensive rating of 111.3. So they were obviously a plus 1.4 when they were on the floor. They were outscoring opponents by 1.4 points per 100 possessions when that group was together on the floor. That's not a great number. That is, obviously you would rather be positive than minus, which the Cavs are here, but considering the amount of talent that group has in it, you would expect it to be a better number than just a plus 1.4. You would expect them to be plus 5 or better, the way they were Donovan Mitchell's first year. I know Max Strus obviously was not part of that, as he was still in the Miami Heat at that point and not a member of the Cavs, but you would expect the Cavs starting lineup with as much talent as it has to be better than it was last year. So what caused that to go wrong? Why did the Cavs not get the most out of that group? One, I do think there's something to be said about the fact that they only played 368 minutes together. That's not a ton of minutes considering that there was a new face, that there were so many guys that were in and out of the lineups, where all 5 of those guys missed a significant chunk of the season at some point. Jarrett Allen, maybe you don't want to call the first 5 games significant of the season. That's fine. Get that. But the other 4 guys did all miss significant time, where they had injuries that kept them out for at least a week, if not longer. Darius Garland and Evan Mobley obviously missed time together from December until February. Donovan Mitchell and Max Strus also missed time that overlapped a little bit in the second half of the season. But for the most part, there were a lot of pieces moving in and out of this lineup. So I do think, even though there was continuity between the core four from the year before and this past season, adding in another piece in Max Strus, it kind of, I do think, took a little bit of time for that group to adjust to it. It also took time because the group was constantly adjusting as to who was in the starting lineup and who wasn't. It wasn't as if they had some huge stretch of the season where all 5 of them were available. These 28 games came pretty scattered throughout the year. So I do think that's something that's worth noting for. So if you look back to Donovan Mitchell's first year in Cleveland, go back 2 seasons, the core 4 of Mobley, Allen, Garland, and Mitchell, that group played 871 minutes together, and they had a net rating of 8.8. They had an offensive rating of 118.9, defensive rating of just under 111. So that group was very, very good 2 years ago. Obviously, it was not as good this past year. They played, if you remove Max Strus from that starting lineup and just go with the core 4, they played 568 minutes this past season, which is a good chunk of minutes, but their net rating was only 1.2. So something got worse from the 22-23 season to the 23-24 season. I think a lot of this is on Darius Garland. I think a lot of this is on Evan Mobley because those guys were injured and not always playing at 100%. And obviously Donovan Mitchell wasn't either. Jarrett Allen for the most part was. So I don't think he needs to be included in this discussion. But the question I have is, how much of the drop-off from year 1 of this group together to year 2 of this group together can be attributed to health issues? I certainly think part of it, but I think Darius Garland is the guy that I look at when I see this lineup not gelling together the way it did in the past. I think Darius Garland is a big part of that. And why do I think Darius Garland is a big part of that? Because he had a drop-off in his three-point shooting, where he was a guy that, he shot, I believe it was a career best, Donovan Mitchell's first year in Cleveland. He shot 41% from 3. That's right. It was a career best. And this past year, he dropped down to 37.1%. That 4 percentage points is a big deal when you are such a high volume shooter. And I would like for Darius, obviously, to be a higher volume shooter moving forward. I'd like him to go from 6.2 attempts to like 8 attempts per game. And we've talked about that a ton on this show. I would like to see that improve. But when you have a drop off in a percentage like that, it's going to affect things. And then as for Donovan Mitchell, he also had a bit of a drop off where he went from just a shade under 39% from 3 in his first year in Cleveland, which was a career high for him from beyond the arc, to 36.8, so just under 37%. So when you combine those two, they dropped off like 6 percentage points from 3. I do think that is a pretty big difference offensively when you look at them having an offensive rating of 118.9, just under 119 in year 1 together as the core 4, to the starting 5 having an offensive rating of 112.7 this past year. I think that is a really big reason why the offense didn't look as good as it needed to. And then I do think this is a conversation worth having with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley about those two playing together. I think if they're going to work out, Evan Mobley's range needs to be expanded beyond the 3-point arc. I think that is a really big deal. I think that is something to watch. And I think that with this lineup, while I've been very much on the record with you guys about how I expect Darius Garland to have a pretty significant bounce back season this year. I think he's going to be much better this upcoming season than he was this past season. I firmly believe that. But I think the key as making this lineup work is going to be how much space can Evan Mobley provide. Because he's not provided a ton of space, it has caused things to be a little bit clunky at times offensively for the Cavs. So if he can provide that space, I think then we start to see this lineup work so much better together. And I think that is one of the biggest keys for this lineup. I also think, they do need to shoot the ball better. That includes Darius Garland, who I mentioned dropped 4 percentage points. That includes Donovan Mitchell, who dropped 2 percentage points from beyond the arc. They need to shoot more with Evan Mobley, but I also think Max Strus needs to be a little bit better as a shooter from the outside. He shot 35% from 3 this year. If you go back 2 years ago, he shot 41% from 3 on 6.5 attempts per game. Do I expect him to be 41% from deep again? No, but I do expect him to be better than 35% from three. So I think if they get better shooting from those three guys in the backcourt, and obviously Max Strus is a small forward, then I think this group will be a lot better. If they don't, I don't know how much better it's going to be just on Evan Mobley expanding his range, which I do expect to happen. As far as this group changing, considering what they're paying everybody, I would be very surprised if this is not the starting lineup. Obviously, you're going to start all four of the core four. That's not a discussion. Max Strus is really the only spot that's up for discussion. And when they gave him the contract they gave him last summer, I think it was pretty clear that they were going to have to put him in the starting lineup. Whether it made a ton of sense or it didn't, I would like to see maybe a little bit more size at that spot. But I expect this to be the starting lineup moving forward. I don't think that's going to be something that changes next year. So that's the Cavs starting lineup. That's their most common lineup. Next, I want to talk about their best lineup and what it was last year, and if this group projects to be just as good this upcoming season for the Cavs under Kenny Atkinson. That's straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs. I love sports. You love sports that you're watching or listening to this. Of course you love sports. You love basketball, and you can't wait for the NBA to be back in the season. We're getting closer and closer to games mattering again. Of course, baseball is going on right now, and FanDuel is the place to go anytime you're in the mood to dream up some bets. Just open up that FanDuel app, go to FanDuel.com, and you can take care of it. And FanDuel is taking care of you because they've got something for everybody every day all summer long. A boost, a bonus. They've got something for you daily on FanDuel. One of the things that I've been talking to you about, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show when I had Spencer German, and the odds have changed here with Emmanuel Clase to win the American League Cy Young. Emmanuel Clase has, and I know last night he didn't pitch. He had saved 4 games in a row. The guy was ready for a day off. 4 saves in a row. You can't find a better pitcher in baseball, to me. There's not a more dominant pitcher in the game of baseball right now than Emmanuel Clase. Maybe he doesn't win the Cy Young. If I had a vote, it'd be towards Emmanuel Clase. He went from the time I recorded with Spencer German earlier this week to as I record this show on Wednesday afternoon. Emmanuel Clase went from plus 10,000 to win the AL Cy Young to plus 8,000 to win the Cy Young. So I hope you took my advice. And the plus 10,000, great value. Plus 8,000, still awesome value. But I can't find a better pitcher, a more dominant pitcher in the game of baseball than Emmanuel Clase. So I think he is very much deserving of the Cy Young. So head on over to FanDuel.com and you can start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So spent a ton of time talking about the Cavs starting lineup and what went wrong, what can improve there. And that lineup, of course, was not the most successful one for the Cavs. And, oftentimes you want your starting lineup to be that group that just goes out and can dominate teams, can give you a great start to the game, can be a group that you're very comfortable as a coach going to close games out. That's what you're looking for, right? Well, that group for the Cavs wasn't always the case. And part of that, again, is because of injuries. So now I want to talk about the lineup that was the best high volume lineup for the Cavs last year. Of course, you can go play around, and I will mention a couple of these coming up in segment number 3 today. You can play around on the NBA stats page or Cleaning the Glass, which is where I got a lot of these stats. And you can find lineups that were better than the one I'm about to talk about, but they played far less minutes. So the group that was the best lineup, in my opinion, for the Cavs last year was Donovan Mitchell, Isaac Okoro, Max Strus, Dean Wade, and Jarrett Allen. That group of 5 played 232 minutes together, which was the second most minutes of any 5-man lineup that the Cavs had an offensive rating of 121.4, had a defensive rating of 101.8. That's a plus 19.6 net rating during the regular season. This group was awesome. This was a group that we saw get a lot of run together when Darius Garland and Evan Mobley were out. This was the group that JB Bickerstaff really relied upon to win a lot of those games when the Cavs got hot, despite missing 2 of their 4 best players. And this lineup right here that I look at is the prototypical 1 guard, 3 wings, 1 big man lineup that you see a lot of teams run. ESPN's Brian Windhurst, when he talks about the Cavs, he talks about the 1-3-1 format, not the 1-3-1 zone defense, but the 1-3-1 lineup format. And I believe when he's talking about that, this is the lineup in particular that pops into my head, because this is the one that fits that billing and had the most success last year for the Cavs. And this lineup is why I think Dean Wade's health is so important for the Cavs and their success this season and in the future. When he is healthy, Dean Wade is part of some awesome lineups, and this was one that you can point to and say, man, having that guy on the floor just increases the Cavs' chances of winning. No, his numbers aren't going to blow you away, but he's a really good shooter that's also a really good defender. And the Cavs, as we've talked about, they've got a bunch of guys that are 6'5" or 6'6" and shorter, and then 6'10" or taller. They don't have many guys that are 6'8", 6'9". Dean Wade is one of the more irreplaceable guys on the Cavs. I'm not saying he is irreplaceable in the way that Donovan Mitchell is, because Mitchell obviously is the most talented and best player on this team, but the Cavs don't have another player with Dean Wade's skill set. And that, to me, is something that makes this lineup really work. Now, the question I have about this lineup moving forward and how successful it can be is, how much point guard will the Cavs be comfortable with Donovan Mitchell playing next year? He was obviously thrust into that role when Darius Garland was injured, had that jaw injury. And I will say, I was very impressed with how Donovan Mitchell handled himself, how good he was as a passer. I think the guy who Donovan Mitchell was in Utah is a different player than the guy he is in Cleveland. I think he's much better. And this is one of the areas where I think he improved the most. I think that as a distributor, he was fantastic. But that's also something that I do think can wear on him a little bit more, when not only does he have to be the go-to bucket getter, which he's always going to be on this Cavs team, but when he also has to be the facilitator, the lead ball handler, when he has to work that much harder offensively. Is this one of the things that, despite this lineup being so good and Donovan being so good in that role, is this one of the things that you wonder led to him having some wear and tear knee issues down the stretch of the season? I think it's a fair question to ask. I do. Because he was used so much and his minutes were so high, where he played almost 36 minutes a game last year. Putting him in this role, I think, is a little bit more of a more stressful role than his normal one, because at times he can lay back and then get the ball and go attack, where in this role he had to be the guy all the time. And he's obviously always the guy for the Cavs, but this is a role where he is doing so much helping for others and not having others do helping for him. And that is something that I do think wears on you. So that's the biggest question I have about this group. I will say, with Donovan running the point in this group, 66% of the points that this group of five, again, Donovan, Isaac Okoro, Max Strus, Dean Wade, Jarrett Allen, scored, 66% of the points scored were assisted on. I think that's a really great sign, considering they didn't have a quote-unquote true point guard on the floor. The other thing, I thought they rebounded pretty well, considering that, Jarrett Allen hasn't always been the best rebounder in the world, and they're playing a little undersized in other spots with this group. It's a little bit of a smaller lineup, but they were collecting over 53% of available rebounds, which is a pretty good number, I think, for this particular group. The thing that made this lineup work so well is they shot just under 40% from three when all five of these guys were on the floor. They shot 39.6% from three. That's really important. That is contrasted with, when the starting lineup was together, that group shot 37.2%. That might sound like a ton, not sound like a ton, but over hundreds and hundreds of minutes, making 2 or 3% more of your three-pointers is a pretty drastic swing. That can be the difference between an offensive rating of 113 and 121. So that is something that is absolutely worth thinking about. That was the Cavs' best high-volume lineup. I've got a couple more lineups I want to get into that were good, very good actually, arguably better than the lineup I just talked about. They just didn't play enough together. Next, I want to talk about the two lineups that the Cavs have that they can break out next year that I think seeing more of would be a really good thing for Kenny Atkinson and this basketball team. That's next right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Very much appreciate you everydayers out there that stick with me to talk Cavs all summer long. I cannot wait for training camp to arrive. Media Day coming up in just over a month and a half. I can't wait to talk about real basketball and get to know this team so much better under Kenny Atkinson. But for your second listen of the day, go on over and enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no off season in the NBA, obviously. There's stuff going on all the time. We've got the schedule coming out soon. The NBA Cup games were announced that we're going to talk about on tomorrow's episode for the Cavs. And Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and as entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the two other lineups I want to talk about that I want to see more of that were really successful for the Cavs, but these lineups both played under 120 minutes. So the first lineup was the best medium usage lineup that I could find that was between 120-ish minutes and 50 minutes. And that was Donovan Mitchell, Caris LeVert, Max Strus, Dean Wade, Jarrett Allen. So basically the group I just got done talking about, but sub in Caris LeVert for Isaac Okoro instead. This group played 55 minutes together, which not a ton of time, but a decent enough chunk to talk about. They were awesome. Offensive rating for the team, 121.7 in that time. So a little bit better by subbing Caris LeVert in for Isaac Okoro, which you would expect to be the case. Their defensive rating was 86.9, which is so significantly better than what the previous group was. So they had a net rating of 34.8. They were outscoring opponents by 34.8 points per 100 possessions in the 55 minutes that this group played together. That is massive. And I will say that this group, I think, was a little bit heavier on isolation, which you can imagine considering that now there's more of a secondary ball handler in Caris LeVert, secondary creator too. I thought that Caris LeVert's passing took a really big step forward last year. They were a little bit more isolation heavy. Their assist percentage was under 60, where I mentioned last segment about how good that assist percentage was, where they had 66% of their points were assisted upon. So that is something that to think about here. But I do think that this is a lineup that sort of maximizes space for Donovan Mitchell when you substitute Caris LeVert, because teams are going to respect him more. I know Isaac Okoro shot a better percentage from three, but Caris LeVert is such a much more willing shooter that teams are going to respect and defend him closer than they are Isaac Okoro standing in the corner. Plus LeVert, I think, moves around a little bit more, and that's just worth bringing up. I think this is a great mixture, if you will, of maximizing the space for Donovan Mitchell while also allowing him to lean on somebody else as a lead guard, because Caris LeVert can play point guard at times. I wouldn't want him out there playing 40 minutes a night at point guard, but for stretches, he has shown he can do it. So that's one of the lineups that I would like to see more of. They played 55 minutes together last year. If this group plays 100 minutes together, I would expect to have some pretty good results. I just think that this is a group that fits really well together. I love the fit by injecting a little bit more offense with Caris LeVert other than Isaac Okoro, and they actually took a much bigger step forward defensively than you might have thought. The other one, and I think some of you guys are going to yell about this lineup because of a player that's involved here. The other lineup that didn't play a ton but was really successful last year for the Cavs was Darius Garland, Isaac Okoro, Caris LeVert, George Niang, here comes the yelling, and Evan Mobley. I know a lot of you don't like George Niang. I understand he was terrible in the playoffs, and there's no nice way to say that. But there were stretches last year where George Niang was pretty solid. If you look back at the month of February he had for the Cavs, George Niang was actually a really good player, a really good role player for them. So say what you want, that he can't play, he shouldn't be on the floor, whatever. I get it. But there were times where he was actually good, and this lineup, I think, was one that really highlighted him, or that he was part of that was really good and deserves highlighting. So this group played 118 minutes together last year. 118. They had an offensive rating of 120, a defensive rating of 96.9, net rating of over 23. So you have to be really happy with that in 118 minutes. Not as drastic as the group before, but still a really good group that is worth seeing out there for a little bit more time if you can swing it. Also, what interests me about this is of the lineups that had, so the Cavs would sort of split last year. They'd always try and have, when everyone was healthy, of course, which wasn't often, but they would always try and have one of Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell on the floor and one of Evan Mobley or Jarrett Allen on the floor. The lineups that I've talked about, the starting lineup obviously has all four. The next lineup I talked about was a Jarrett Allen, Donovan Mitchell. Last lineup was Jarrett Allen, Donovan Mitchell. This lineup is Darius Garland, Evan Mobley. This was the best Darius Garland, Evan Mobley pairing lineup, where they were plus 23, 118 minutes together. I'm very curious next year how Kenny Atkinson's going to handle that grouping, where JB Bickerstaff was very adamant that he wanted one of the guards on the floor when everyone was healthy, of course, and one of the bigs on the floor. Is Kenny Atkinson going to be the same way? That's something that when training camp rolls around, I'm very excited to find out what his philosophy as a coach is on that, because I do think that's going to affect how we look at some of these lineups. So that is something that is very much worth noting, worth looking into. But again, thank you for making today's Locked On Cavs your first listen. Check out Locked On NBA for your second listen today. They've got great stuff going on there that you do not want to miss. Again, you can find the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening via Apple, Spotify, anywhere else, make sure you click that subscribe button for me. If you're watching the show on YouTube, hit that like button. If you're still watching, click that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell as well so you know when the latest Locked On Cavs is going up on YouTube. Again, thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day.